let's have a look at a model response to a question for the Inspector Calls portion of the GCSE English Literature exam. So the question specifically that I'm looking at is going to be, how are the older and younger generations presented differently in Priestley's and Inspector Calls? Okay, so the question, quite simply, older, younger, we're obviously looking for the older generations at, Mr. and Mrs. Burling, the inspector. For the younger generation, we're looking at obviously Sheila, we're looking at Eric, and then in this weird kind of middle category, we've got Gerald. Now, notice that we've got these lines here, which in my head are representing two different manifestations of the older generation and the younger generation. So Mr. and Mrs. Burling are similar to each other, but they're not at all like the inspector. Sheila is not at all like Eric, apart from the fact they're both young, they both learn something. Gerald gets his own little strand because he's in the middle of the age categories, and also because he is quite an interesting one in terms of how he responds. So that really is the extent of my pre-thinking before I put a little plan together. And then the really important section is this opening paragraph. So my opening paragraph says, Priestley's play at its heart is an indictment of the class system in Edwardian England, and as such the generational disparities between the characters are some of the primary movers in this purpose. The older generation are a relic of an outdated model of class and pro-capitalist sentiment, whereas the younger generation represent a hopeful future congruent with 1946 more than 1912. Okay, so a couple of things to note in this opening paragraph that I'm doing. The first thing that I'm doing is I'm making sure to drop a little bit of contextual detail into there. Okay, so notice that I'm using these little kind of signposting phrases where we have kind of Edwardian England, we have class system, and we have class pro-capitalist, younger generation, blah, 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 blah. Okay, so all of these are my little kind of my AO3 signposts. I haven't done much with them yet, but I'm signaling to my examiner, yes, I'm aware that context is assessed on this question. Okay, the other thing that I'm doing in this opening sentence, and notice that it is just one sentence. It might look like a paragraph or an introduction, but really it is one sentence. The key thing that I'm doing is I'm identifying the key terms of the question. Okay, so generational disparities. Okay, older generation, younger generation. Okay, so what I'm doing there is I am just nodding, I will say, nodding towards the terms of the question. But I go one step further because I actually answer the question in brief. So generational disparities between the characters are some of the primary movers in this purpose. Okay, so that's what the generational disparities are doing. Then I'm going to say the older generation are a relic of an outdated model, whereas the younger generation represent a hopeful future. Okay, so notice that my green is doing two things, but they're really ticking one assessment objective, and that is, of course, AO1. Okay, so in terms of AO1, the reason that they are so successful here is because I'm making a nod to the question with, older and younger generations presented differently. That's a key thing there. So hence generational disparities. Okay, and the darker green, primary movers in talking about class. Older generation are a relic, younger generation hopeful future. Okay, so I'm answering the question in brief. So my first paragraph, really simply, is answering the question in one sentence. If I only had one sentence to answer this question about how they're presented differently, this is what I would say. I would say they're presented differently for this purpose, and this is what that difference looks like. Okay, and I've very neatly tied my purpose to the contextual factors that are right there. And the final thing that I'm doing, which I really can't avoid doing, is making an assessment of what is going on. Okay, so Priestley's play is an indictment of the class system. Okay, Priestley's play is an indictment of the class system. That there is my AO2. Notice that my AO2 in my opening sentence is going to be necessarily brief because I'm not doing any close textual analysis yet. However, I'm ticking all three boxes in that opening sentence. Okay, let's jump into the first paragraph. So my first paragraph is going to be talking about the older generation. So let's have a look. The first thing to observe is the sheer volume of quotations that I've managed to slot in, okay? So I've got social superior, I've got old generation who know it all, can't take a joke. I'm re-quoting joke from that one there. Then we've got nothing to be ashamed of, re-quoting ashamed. Hard-headed, man of business, rather cold woman. So what I've done here is I've made sure that my AO2 is going to be richly detailed, quite simply because I can't avoid doing AO2 when I've got this many quotations. And notice that these are really easy and quite short quotations that you can commit to memory. The younger generation who know it all, social superior, nothing to be ashamed of, hard-headed man of business, rather cold woman. These are just really easy, big bang for your buck quotations to know about Mr. and Mrs. Burling. So starting with the older generation, what I've got here is, of course, a signpost. Okay, so I'm signposting to my examiner that I am doing what the question asks me to do. Okay, so my opening clause here, starting with the older generation, I am literally just signposting to my examiner that I'm doing AO1 in as much as I'm answering the question that has been posed. Okay, so AO1, starting with the older generation. Then we're going to jump into some actual close textual analysis because there's a lot of marks available for AO2 on this as well. Okay, so we can see that the patriarch, Mr. Burling, and his wife, his social superior, represent a generation that is wedded to the old ways and contemptuous of the nicely embedded quotation there. Embedded quotation. It's just a way of showing off that you deserve higher marks when you're quoting. Contemptuous of the younger generation, know all and can't take a joke. Notice if I've missed anything out there, I just use this ellipsis in square brackets to show that I'm skipping part of my quotation. It's just an easy way of getting the stuff that matters into here without spending any extra words. The language choice. Okay, so the language choice. What am I doing here? I'm signposting again, but this time I'm signposting that my AO2 is going to be taking place. Okay, so signpost yet again, the language choice, AO2. And what does it actually say about it? It is deliberate, stirring in Mr. Burling's comment here. To him, the family's involvement in the downfall of a young working class woman amounts to a joke. Okay, so re-quoting from my quote, if she has not died. Indeed, both he and his wife remain resolute. So notice this here again. Indeed, this here, it's another signposting phrase, but this is when I'm doubling down on my AO1. Essentially, what I mean by that is I am not only just stating one thing and moving on, I am reinforcing the argument that I made up near the top. Okay, so here's my idea, indeed, and then I'm going to add more evidence to it to explore. Okay, then I've dropped my adjective there just to kind of slot in a bit of terminology. Being a crucial feature of their indifference, they do occasionally resist culpability until pressed, but they are consistent in their refusal to feel bad about their actions, a huge distinction. As a hard-headed man of business and a rather cold woman, notice how I just pepper the little short, easy quotations in a beautifully embedded way where I don't need to do much extra with them. Mr. and Mrs. Burling represent the unfeeling harshness of capitalism. Ooh, unfeeling harshness of capitalism. What have I done there? Well, quite simply, I'm dropping my AO3 references here, okay? Unfeeling harshness of capitalism that Priestley sought to undermine with his vocal support for left-wing politics in the build-up to the 1945's ousting of the Tory party, okay? So this little section of my paragraph, notice my AO3, it's about 1/5 of my paragraph. In fact, can we add it up? We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18 lines in the paragraph. 3 out of 18 would be 1/6, so close to 1/5. So you basically want about 20% AO3. In any paragraph that you do, about 20% of it is going to be AO3. Quite simply because that's 20% of your marks, okay? We're not counting the AO4 because you don't do anything separate for that. You just impress as you go through with your vocabulary. But in terms of the AO1, AO2, AO3, i.e. the bulk of your marks, that is going to be 20%, and you can show that in the structure of your paragraphs. Okay, easy peasy. So this paragraph, again, you'll notice that the bulk of it is just AO1 argument with AO2 justification. Then I link it quite smoothly to the contextual features. Okay, my next paragraph. In stark contrast. Okay, in stark contrast. This is another signposting phrase to show that, again, examiner, I am answering the question that has been posed because I'm exploring. If you think back to the question said how they presented differently. Okay, so in stark contrast, it's clear them answering my question. So despite their roots, we find that the Burling children, Sheila and Eric, whose initially smug and carefree attitudes are shaken permanently by the inspector's intervention and who are frightened by the way their parents talk. Okay, so we're going to jump in with a quick identification of what I've done yet again here, which is peppering with short quotations. Okay. What else have we got? Quotation. Okay, so again, I've got a bunch of quotations that I'm going to use to illustrate my point. So, frightened by the way their parents talk. And again, notice with my use of square brackets, the way that I have embedded my quotation. Nifty. Okay. Sheila, who starts to play as a giggly, naive girl and who wishes she hadn't been told about Eva's death when she'd been so happy tonight. Again, embedding masterclass going on here. I'm just slotting in these quotations to illustrate my point, but who quickly becomes the voice of reason and the most hopeful figure by the play's conclusion. Okay, so there is really strong AO1, AO2. I am talking about how the purpose is affected. How the purpose is achieved, the effects that it has, and how that relates to this idea of the different reactions to the events of the play, right? Eric, too, though much less forgivable for his actions in the eyes of a modern audience, notice in the eyes of a modern audience is just a subtle little bit of AO3. Okay, I'm talking about how a different audience from now compared with 1945 would see his behavior as much less acceptable. Not that it should ever really have been acceptable, but there you go. Is cast as a sympathetic figure who learns his lesson and condemns his father for his heartlessness. You're not the sort of father a chap could go to if he was in trouble. The inspector's suggestion that the younger ones are more impressionable seems to be a direct ventriloquism of Priestley. Oh, okay. So what have I done here? I have signposted once again direct ventriloquism, so that's where you make someone talk for you, of Priestley making the claim about progressive nature of young voters in the 40s who spent the last decade seeing the need for social reform, not least in the Beveridge report that highlighted the plights of the poor. Bada bing, bada boom. Okay, so 1942, the Beveridge report. I could have mentioned that, but essentially voters in the 40s is enough. But this section here, once more, I've got my AO3, and it is linked to what we are saying, which is that that Sheila has been shaken permanently. Eric learns his lesson, and as a result, the younger ones are more impressionable. Okay, so there is my AO1 argument running through the paragraph. And I'm linking it to the important context, which is that Priestley is saying the younger generation are going to be more open to learning things about social justice, which is going to lead them eventually to vote in 1945 for the Labour government under Clement Attlee. Okay, so AO3 is very tightly linked to the point. Finally, there is Gerald. Okay, so again, finally is a nice little AO1 signpost to show, I mean, it's just a subtle way of showing that this is an argument that has been constructed. Okay, so I'm not just going next. AO1, finally, there is Gerald. Okay, so why have I chosen to put this paragraph at the end? Why have I chosen this character to put on his own? There is Gerald. Okay, so answering the question. A character who, by virtue of both his age and his lifestyle, does not belong in either category. Okay, so I'm developing my argument here. Okay, so again, AO1, developing the argument. Whilst the Burling parents and children are fairly one-dimensional archetypes, Gerald is not, and is as such perhaps the focus of Priestley's attention. Okay, so focus of Priestley's attention. Again, it's a very subtle AO3 drop. It's nothing analytical with AO3, but it's a subtle little AO3 drop. Gerald is older than his fiancée, but is not in his 50s like Burling, and occupies a strange position, quote, too masculine to be a dandy, but very much the well-bred man about town. I think that should be hyphenated rather. By too masculine, Priestley clearly means that he tries to fashion himself as a man of business, like his esteemed father of Crofts Limited, and also like Mr. Burling, you might add. But by man about town, he's clearly indicating that this man is a socialite. In the eyes of Priestley, okay, a character like this is worse than the Burling parents, not a new money capitalist who at least worked his way up, nor an old money philanthropist who used wealth for the support of select others in society, i.e. Mr. Burling, Mr. B, and Mrs. Burling, old money philanthropist, so she has a charity, a women's charity. But instead a self-serving quasi-dandy who should have no authority on anything, but who makes the bold claim at the end that everything's all right now in spite of his actions. Okay, so what I did here with my AO3 is I slotted it in here. So with my nice little signpost phrase of in the eyes of Priestley. Okay, then I just drop a couple of other contextual ideas: new money capitalist, old money philanthropist. And this is kind of more embedded. Okay, so notice that my AO3 is embedded in this paragraph rather than linked at the end, which is another way that you can do it. And I include this paragraph just as an indication that you can. But more than anything, this paragraph is AO1. It is depth. Okay, it is in this paragraph that I would be approaching my kind of level 8s and 9s, because I'm going into more detail. I'm not just saying this character does this character does this. I'm going, this character is different from all of the other characters. This is why Priestley pays particular attention to them. This is why this was what happens to him. This is what links to the kind of contextual ideas of the play. We're going a lot deeper here. We're being a lot more original, a lot more engaged. Okay, and then you'll notice you do not need a conclusion in a response like this. You just need a final sentence. The play's treatment of the different generations. Okay, so I'm referring to the question. Deftly handled and provides social commentary on the world of 1912, subsumed by a hopeful future in post-war 1946. AO3 provides social commentary. AO2. So notice that just like my my introductory sentence, my conclusive sentence, and it is just a sentence, not a paragraph, is ticking the boxes once more. AO1, AO2, AO3 in just a single sentence that rounds off the argument that I've made. That's how you do a successful answer to a literature question for the GCSE, specifically for an inspector calls. Okay.